At the height of his fame, Dan Blocker felt invincible. His booming laugh filled studios. His gentle eyes comforted millions each Sunday night as Hoss Cartwright. Yet behind the towering frame, an affable grin lay a story few ever expected to end so painfully. Imagine a man larger than life, 6'4", over 300 pounds, whose mere presence seemed carved from the legends of the Old West. Now picture that same giant felled not by outlaws or frontier gunfire, but by a silent, unseen enemy within his own body. The shock still lingers nearly half a century later, sparking questions about fate, privacy, and the devastating power of sudden loss. He arrived in this world on a winter's day, December 10th, 1928, in a tiny Texas town called Dalb. Doctors gasped when they saw his birth weight, 14 pounds, the heaviest baby ever recorded in Bowie County. From his very first breath, the enormity of his life was clear. His parents, Ora Shack Blocker and Mary Arizona, christened him Daniel, already knowing that this child would carry a presence no ordinary nursery could hold. Their modest grocery store in O'Donnell became both a family home and a stage for his early exploits. Wherever Dan went, his size announced him. Wherever he lingered, stories grew. On Saturday nights, a makeshift ring formed in the middle of Main Street. Locals roped off a stretch of dusty pavement and dared any challenger to face the young block of muscle. For Dan, these rough-and-tumble matches were more than mere spectacle. They were declarations of ownership over his own destiny. With every locked jaw, every thrown punch, he revealed not just raw strength, but a core of confidence that would carry him through far tougher battles ahead. His teenage body already boasted 275 pounds on a 6'3" frame, but those dusty duels taught him more about resilience than any gym could. School days led him to the Texas Military Institute, where football coaches spotted his potential and awarded him a scholarship to Sul-Ross State University. There, he paired bookish study of English literature with the brutal ballet of linebacker drills. By 18, he towered at 6'3" and tipped the scales near 300 pounds, the hometown tough guy with a voracious appetite for knowledge. Yet life, as it often does, waited until the moment he felt most secure to veer him into uncharted territory. A drama club director pressed him onto the stage for a production of Arsenic and Old Lace, simply because he was strong enough to move the weighty theatrical props. Under the bright lights, something clicked. The roar of an audience replaced the cheer of the football crowd. In that instant, Dan discovered an entirely new kind of strength, one born of vulnerability, fear, and the shared thrill of storytelling. He changed majors, swapped playbooks for scripts, and plunged into the world of theater with a zeal that startled even his closest friends. After college, offers to pursue professional football went unopened. Instead, he chased a dream that hadn't fully formed until the first curtain call whispered its promise. Summer stock and repertory productions became his proving grounds. From small-town stages to the bright lights of Broadway and King Lear, he carved out a path defined not by brute force, but by grace under pressure. But destiny's path rarely runs straight. At 22, Dan Blocker found himself drafted into the U.S. Army during the Korean War. He traded scripts for rifles, stages for foxholes. Through the dense forests and jagged ridges of Korea, he emerged as a leader. When a fellow soldier lay trapped under enemy fire, Dan held the line for 4 hours, returning fire against machine guns and mortars. Though the man he fought to protect did not survive, Blocker's valor earned him respect and medals, and a scar deeper than any bullet hole, a quiet understanding of life's fragile edge. Returning home in 1952, seemingly unbreakable, Dan married schoolteacher Dolphia Parker. They built a life anchored by shared values: education, humility, compassion. He earned a master's degree in dramatic arts, taught English and drama in Texas and New Mexico, and raised 4 children with the same steadiness he brought to every stage and set. Hollywood called next, but this time he answered not as a student of theater, but as a teacher of humanity. His resemblance to the heroes of televised westerns landed him bit parts at first, but it was his heart, more than his height, that caught the eye of producer David Dort. In February 1959, Bonanza debuted. Ratings sputtered, the network threatened cancellation, but something about that big, goofy, good-natured Hoss Cartwright resonated. Viewers longed for a hero who could lift a saddle with one hand, yet weep for a neighbor's suffering without hesitation. NBC took a gamble, moved the show to Sundays, and watched it soar. Dan's gentle giant became America's confidant, someone you could trust to protect you, listen to you, and perhaps, most importantly, understand you. Yet by the time Bonanza climbed to the top of the charts, Dan Blocker had already learned the bitter lesson of sudden loss. He understood war's wounds, but nothing prepared him for the invisible threat lingering in his own body. Gallstones that would demand surgery, presumed routine, until a lethal clot turned an ordinary procedure into the deadliest moment of all. The hospital corridors where he had once paced with good-natured jokes became suffocating confines. One night, as anesthesia wore off, he felt dizzy, combative, then silence. Before dawn, the giant was gone, taken by a pulmonary embolism at just 43 years old. Behind him, the world mourned. At his side, Dolphia faced a choice few have to make: step into the glare of public grief or vanish into the quiet privacy they had nurtured together. She chose to disappear, turning her grief into a silent stand against the ceaseless curiosity that had trailed them from Texas plains to Swiss lakes. Their story, rich with triumph, tenderness, and abrupt tragedy, endures as a reminder of fame's fragile guise. Ask yourself, what would you surrender for anonymity, and what price would you pay if it slipped away forever? In the weeks and months following Dan's unexpected passing, a hush fell over Hollywood and his hometown alike. Family friends spoke of disbelief. Cameras and scripts that had defined his life fell silent. Studios that once booked him months in advance paused. Advisors and colleagues tried to fill his calendar with new projects, as if that could bring him back. But no meeting, no rehearsal, no rerun could restore the beating heart behind Hoss Cartwright's iconic smile. Instead, an emptiness settled around O'Donnell, Texas, and Paramount alike. Meanwhile, Dahlia Blocker, his steadfast partner since 1952, faced an impossible choice. She could have taken center stage, shared her grief in interviews, and hosted tribute specials. Instead, she opted for erasure. No televised eulogies, no tell-all memoir, no public memorials. Each inquiry met a quiet refusal. Reporters and fans respected her boundary more often than not, but the curiosity lingered. What drove this woman of grace to vanish from the narrative? It was a testament to a private love that shunned spectacle and sought only sanctuary. Just as Dan once redefined the archetype of the Western hero, Dahlia rewrote expectations of a celebrity spouse's public role. Where most would step under the floodlights of mourning, she stepped back into the shadows. Her choice underscored a recurring theme in their story: the paradox between a life lived large enough for millions to see and a yearning so profound it rejected observation. In her silence, she guarded his legacy from commodification, preserving instead the truth of their simple values. Contrast that private sorrow with the persona Dan crafted for millions: a gentle giant, part strength, part sensitivity, wholly authentic. Hoss Cartwright could bring down a herd of stampeding steers or cradle a wounded child with equal tenderness. The divide between the man and the character reflected Dan's own inner dialogue. A decorated soldier who loathed firearms stepped into the dusty boots of one of television's most famous gunfighters. Audiences cheered when he drew his Colt, unaware that off-screen he had sworn never to hold a weapon again. In search of a refuge from the glare, Dan cultivated a life far from the Ponderosa set. He and Dahlia scouted a quiet corner of Europe, Lugano, Switzerland, where Italian and German mingle beneath the Alpine peaks. The couple fell in love with the drowsy lanes, the placid lake, and the promise of a life unburdened by fame. Here Dan was simply a husband and father, not a household name. Weekends brought village markets instead of autograph lines. School runs replaced studio rides. Their love story deepened in the tranquil Swiss air. Yet even in this idyll, the scars of war and stardom lingered. Friends recalled Dan lying awake, haunted by ambushes near Pork Chop Hill or recollections of bullets whizzing past. He once confided to a close friend that he felt torn between gratitude for his life and sorrow for a world too quick to celebrate violence. His faith as a free Methodist reinforced his conviction that kindness should triumph over aggression. In conversations over espresso, he spoke passionately about justice, compassion, and the duty to defend those without a voice. Back on screen, Hoss's gentle mercy reflected Dan's convictions. Every act of compassion in Bonanza mirrored his real life. A decorated sergeant who despised violence yet understood its toll. Behind the scenes, he mentored newcomers, fought for fair treatment, and rejected sensational plots that felt exploitative. In studios and on set, Dan blurred the line between performer and protector, quietly shaping stories that lifted others even as they entertained millions. As viewers, we remember Hoss Cartwright's warmth and strength, yet Dan Blocker's full story runs deeper. He gave us laughter, tears, and a lesson in quiet courage. His departure and Dahlia's deliberate absence remind us that some stories are too personal for the limelight. They chose privacy over publicity. And in that choice, they created the most poignant ending of all. A love so profound it could neither be performed nor paraded. Only lived, as the Blocker children grew older. They carried with them memories of a father whose presence was both commanding and tender. Photographs captured their laughter echoing through a sun-drenched garden in Lugano, the Swiss Alps standing silent sentinel behind them. Yet those images only hint at the warmth Dan brought into every room. Whether he was teaching his daughter to ride a bike or showing his sons how to lose themselves in a good book, his kindness was a constant beacon. He approached fatherhood with the same unassuming grace that defined Hoss Cartwright. No grandiose displays, just steady attentiveness, heartfelt encouragement, and a playful spirit that transformed ordinary moments into treasured memories. After his death, those cherished recollections became both balm and burden. The children, Deborah, Dana, David, and Dirk, found their lives cast in the longest shadow a father's absence can throw. Friends remember how Dahlia guided them through breakfast tables heavy with unspoken sorrow, offering stories of their father's spirit rather than dwelling on the day he slipped away. She taught them that grief did not have to be loud, that sadness could be honored quietly, and that love was something you carried forward, not something you clung to in public view. In doing so, she passed down the resilient clarity that had defined her relationship with Dan, private yet profound, a sanctuary amid life's unpredictability. The entertainment world, ever hungry for retrospectives, struggled to fill the void Dan left behind. Bonanza reruns surged in popularity amid a collective urge to revisit Hoss's gentle strength. Yet cast members and crew found every playback tinged with loss. Michael Landon, once his best friend and on-screen cousin, admitted years later that he watched the series through tears, each episode a bittersweet reminder of a collaborator he would never see again. Studios assembled tribute panels and fan clubs held vigils, championing Dan's legacy while probing every available archive for unseen footage. But those who knew him best cringed at the idea that their memories could be distilled into sound bites. For them, he was far more nuanced than any highlight reel could convey. In Hollywood's flashbulb haze, Dan Blocker's story assumed mythic proportions. He became the good cowboy who died too soon, a cautionary tale about the fragility of stardom. Documentaries chronicled his rise and fall, dissecting his war record, his career choices, and that fateful surgery. Yet such analyses often felt incomplete to those who had lived alongside him. They missed the moments when he would slip away from a lively set to help a young actor find the courage to cry on cue, or when he would pause a scene mid-shoot to comfort a homesick crew member with an impromptu lesson from Shakespeare. Those small acts of mentorship and empathy rarely made final cuts, but they were the essence of the man behind the myth. Over time, the Blocker family embraced the unexpected role of stewards of Dan's memory. They organized small gatherings in O'Donnell and Lugano, inviting veterans and educators whose lives he had touched. In each city, the unspoken rule remained the same: focus on the man, not the star. No cameras, no commercial sponsors, just fellow travelers sharing stories of compassion and courage. From these modest reunions emerged a quieter legacy than a star's foundation or a museum exhibit might convey, but perhaps one that resonated more deeply. A living testament to how one person's simple choices, teaching a child, defending a comrade, befriending a stranger, can ripple outward long after the loudest applause has faded. Yet even as time softened grief's sharp edges, the unanswered questions lingered. How could a routine operation yield such a devastating outcome? Medical experts pointed to the unpredictability of pulmonary embolisms, yet family doctors and lawyers pored over hospital records with dogged determination. They discovered small lapses in post-operative care that might have made all the difference: delayed ambulation, scant monitoring of vital signs, a dismissive note in a surgical log. These revelations fueled a silent quest for accountability that contrasted starkly with Dahlia's public silence. Where she halted inquiries at her own threshold, others forged ahead, determined to honor Dan's memory by ensuring that no other family endured the same heartbreak. The contrast between Hollywood's headlines and the Blockers' intimate realities underscores the core tension in their story: the collision of public fascination and personal sovereignty. Fame can illuminate life's peaks, but it can also cast shadows too heavy to bear. Dan Blocker's ascent from a hardworking farm boy to television royalty captivated millions, yet his final chapter remains a cautionary whisper. No matter how bright the lights shine, the human heart can be vulnerable in ways that no audience ever suspects. And in the silent hush that follows, those closest to the story find the strength to navigate grief on their own terms. As Dahlia so resolutely demonstrated in the decades since his passing, Dan Blocker's life has woven itself into the tapestry of Hollywood folklore. Documentaries have attempted to distill his essence into neat chapters: Korean War hero, teacher turned cowboy, too gentle giant cut down too soon. But these labels only skim the surface of a nuanced life. Behind every reenactment and behind-the-scenes anecdote lies a man who resisted categorization. His personal archives, when they surface, tend to reveal more contradictions than confirmations. Letters home from Korea brimming with philosophical musings, diary entries about analyzing Hamlet, tax records showing modest earnings despite astronomical fame. For modern audiences, the real intrigue resides in those gray areas that neither fan club nor film critic can tame. Social media fan pages celebrate Hoss Cartwright with memes and quotes: "Be kind, speak softly, ride tall," yet rarely mention the man who despised guns off-screen. Pilgrimages to O'Donnell, Texas, happen. Screenplay competitions even introduced a Blocker Prize for scripts that showcased complex protagonists grappling with moral dilemmas rather than relying solely on action beats. In this way, Dan's legacy crystallized as more than an artifact of nostalgia. It evolved into a dynamic influence, shaping the very mechanics of storytelling. Educational institutions extended the conversation further. The Dan Blocker Memorial Scholarship was established at Sul Ross State University, supporting students in dramatic arts who demonstrated leadership and community service. Recipients traveled to Lugano to study at summer theater intensives, tracing the footsteps of the man who bridged ranch life, Broadway, and battlegrounds. Faculty members spoke of Dan's unquenchable curiosity, his habit of annotating Shakespeare with references to Dickens or Whitman, and they encouraged students to mine their own eclectic interests for creative fuel. The message was clear: authenticity arises not from forced eccentricity, but from weaving genuine facets of self into one's craft. Against this backdrop, Dahlia's decision to guard her privacy acquired new dimensions. When journalists and biographers petitioned for interviews or books, she responded with a single line: "Our story is written in the lives we lived, not the pages they would print." That terse refusal, repeated across decades, shaped a code of ethics for celebrity journalism. Editors learned that restraint can be as powerful as revelation, and some outlets adopted policies to approach grieving families with offers rather than demands. In a small but meaningful shift, the industry acknowledged that subject dignity need not be sacrificed for headlines, a principle born from one couple's steadfast desire to keep certain chapters closed. Through these myriad strands, academic study, fan devotion, industry adaptation, and journalistic reform, Dan and Dahlia Blocker's story transcended its original context. It became a blueprint for balancing public acclaim with private sanctity, for harnessing vulnerability as strength, and for allowing silence to speak when words might wound. As audio clips of his voice persisted on streaming services and vaults of unseen footage surfaced in archives, the essential lesson endured: the most compelling narratives are those that honor both the performative and the personal, that recognized the power in pulling back the curtain just enough to let the soul shine through in the quiet that follows a life lived in both spotlight and shadow. Dan and Dahlia Blocker left a singular gift. Proof that the truest measure of fame may be in what you refuse to display. After his sudden passing, countless headlines chronicled the rise and jarring fall of the gentle giant. Yet the story that matters most is not the one printed on newspaper front pages or replayed in montage reels. It is the one written in everyday acts of compassion, in the stand Dan took against violence he experienced firsthand, and in the vow he and Dahlia made to keep their grief beyond the reach of cameras and curiosity seekers. Every generation rediscovers his legacy in new ways. Streaming services introduce Bonanza to viewers born decades after its original run, yet those same audiences pause when they learn why the man behind Hoss never returned to the set. They gasp at the irony. An actor who spent his career fending off outlaws on screen, undone by a routine procedure. They identify with Dahlia's choice to vanish rather than vend her sorrow, recognizing that in a world addicted to every detail, some wounds heal best in silence. These modern rediscoveries carry echoes of FOMO. Viewers rush to learn the untold nuances, to delve deeper than ever before, to stake their claim on the delicate balance between revelation and respect. Content creators now carry tools forged in the Blocker's story. They know that contrast between strength and vulnerability, public adoration and private grief, fuels the most compelling arcs. They grasp that authenticity emerges when you let your real convictions bleed into your performance, just as Dan did when he channeled his own compassion into every gesture of Hoss Cartwright. And they learn from Dahlia that setting boundaries can become a statement as powerful as any public declaration. Her decision to shield her family teaches that sometimes the most magnetic narrative is the one you choose not to complete for an eager world. For viewers, the takeaway is clear. The characters we love on screen are often mirrors reflecting what we yearn for: steadfast kindness, unwavering loyalty, fierce protection of those we cherish. But the lives behind those characters remind us of our own fragility. We watch the 6'4", 300-pound cowboy tackle troublesome ranch hands, and we forget that in a hospital room far from stage lights, the same heart that fueled his heroic stands could be toppled by a hidden clot. That stark contrast intensifies our empathy. If Dan's body could betray him in a tender moment, what challenges might be lying dormant in our lives, undetected until it's too late? As each viewer presses play, they bring their own stories: the war they survived, the family they adore, the private battles they wage. Dan and Dahlia's choices echo in those personal narratives, inviting a moment of reflection. How much of our pain do we reveal? How much do we preserve as sacred? Their final act was not a grand farewell, but a deliberate retreat, a testament to the idea that dignity can outlast fame. It's a lesson that resonates especially now, when attention costs so little and privacy demands real sacrifice. In classrooms where drama students rehearse the Ponderosa wagon train, in hospital training rooms where surgeons study postoperative care, in podcast studios where hosts debate the ethics of celebrity journalism, the Blocker's legacy endures. It informs best practices, inspires thematic essays, and shapes heartfelt tributes. They are immortal not just as an iconic TV family, but as exemplars of character, in life and in death. Their narrative refuses to settle into a single category. It refuses the neat closure of a scripted ending, growing richer each time someone learns about a forgotten letter Dan wrote from Korea or a private moment when Dahlia taught their children how to grieve without spectacle. What then becomes of the awful ending and tragic death of Dan Blocker and his wife? We see how the most wrenching finale can also spark the most enduring beginning. Their departure from the public eye did not close the chapter. It opened a dialogue that continues to evolve, about courage, compassion, and the right to privacy. It challenges us to consider what truly endures: the applause or the quiet legacy we build in hidden moments of love and conviction. So as the credits roll on this story, remember that the lasting applause is not measured in ratings or social media shares, but in the lives touched, the boundaries respected, and the dignity preserved. Dan Blocker taught millions to believe in the power of kindness. Dahlia taught even more to believe in the power of discretion. Together, they forged a legacy that defies easy storytelling, one that must be lived, guarded, and honored. And in honoring it, we discover a truth more valuable than any headline: that some stories are entrusted, not to an audience, but to our shared respect for what it means to live and to let go.